This is February 28th, our Zoom North Texas Church Freethought service, and we're going to be posting it on YouTube later. But if you're wanting to participate on the live sessions, go to our website and sign up with your email address at the bottom of any page, and you'll get the notices each week with the how to sign in information. So our subject today was suggested to me by a dear, dear friend, by Kit Robertson, who you all know, my love. And we were talking about what to present because I'm always kind of having a lot of ideas churning around in my head. And she said, well, how about the idea, what if you're wrong? And I thought that is a wonderful subject, and you'll see I have a lot of material, and I could have more, but obviously this is chopped off, and you'll see there's a lot of things here that we could go over more about at another time. So here's the answer. What if we're wrong? Well, we are wrong. No doubt about it. Yes, all of us. We're all wrong. So it's not like, oh, we atheists are wrong, but everybody's wrong. It's just we don't know what we're wrong about, right? Because when we find out we're wrong, we generally try to mend our ways. When we realize we're wrong, we stop it. The problem, of course, is maybe we don't. We learn from our mistakes, after all. This is an interesting thing. Fail, F-A-I-L, means first attempt in learning. But the question, like I said, is do we recognize when we're wrong? We don't know what we're wrong about, and sometimes we're wrong, and we really should know it, but we don't. And even court cases turn on this. What would a reasonable person conclude, or how would a reasonable person behave? It's interesting that even the standards of the law line up with what we freethinkers think about life and how we ought to live. It is a fundamental principle of life, trial and error. If you don't try, you won't err, and if you don't err, you don't learn. And that's the whole idea, is when you make a mistake, recognize it, and then don't make it again. Even in science, this is the way it works. Famous quote by Isaac Asimov, the science fiction writer who was himself a scientist, a biochemist, I believe. The most exciting phrase to hear in science, the one that heralds new discoveries, is not eureka, I found it, but that's funny. Something doesn't work right. Something doesn't turn out the way it's expected. That's often when you have something to look into. Like Alexander Fleming seeing the mold on the culture plate and then realizing, gee, the bacteria around the mold all died. That's how we got penicillin. Not from the Bible, that's for sure. And to err is human, that's often used as a kind of a pejorative. Oh, to err is human. If you're human, you're making mistakes. But the point is, that's a feature, not a bug. Karl Popper, the famous 20th century philosopher, some say one of the greatest philosophers of all time. If you're not familiar with his writings, I recommend getting familiar with them. And he wrote this, among many books, that all life is problem solving. We're always trying to put square pegs in round holes, and hopefully we learn from that how to do it better. Don't just get out a hammer and try to make it work. As Thomas Edison said, there's a way to do it better. There's always a way to do it better. There's always a way to improve. So to say that error is human, or as the Bible believers say that everybody's a sinner, there's no shame in that, because there's always a way to do it better. Voltaire had another way to say it. He said that the best is the enemy of the good. But Thomas Edison, I think this is almost the kind of mindset you have to be an inventor, as he was, that you have to believe there's a better way to do it. And what you need to do is to find it. Here's some things that we didn't do too well. Our ancestors didn't do too well for a long time. Things that people believe that are just ridiculous, obviously ridiculous, and many people don't even know about these kinds of things. So up on the top left there, you see that's the biblical cosmology right there. It's not a 6,000-year-old Earth that's a globe orbiting the sun and so forth. It's a flat Earth with a firmament way far away with all the stars embedded in it, an ocean beyond that. That's where all the waters came from that caused the Noachian flood. The Earth is then supported by pillars, the pillars of the Earth. And what are they on top? What supports them? Well, let's not talk about that. And of course, God is beyond all that at the top. We forget about geocentrism very often. People know that it was once thought that the sun went around the earth, but look at all the complexity that had to be introduced to make the motions of the planets. Those are all the epicycles that were added, all the ad hoc, oh, well, then it must be this way in order to maintain and preserve geocentrism. Instead of people realizing much earlier, there's something wrong with geocentrism. And it's often said that it's our own hubris, our own pride that kept us from realizing that, well, maybe the earth is not the center. Top right there, weighing on there, oh my gosh, something nefarious, but actually that is the emerods that are mentioned in the Bible. People thought that emerods, meaning hemorrhoids, were a punishment sent by God. You can find numerous passages, at least more than one in the Old Testament, where God kills these enemies of the Israelites and then gives them emerods or hemorrhoids. Bottom left, we see one of the saints being tormented by demons, and we see that even in the New Testament, Jesus believed that demons caused madness. How about that middle lower? When the microscope was invented and people started looking at things, one of the things they noticed was in semen, sperm, you had these little spermatozoa. And of course, they didn't even know about eggs until after that. They thought that the man's seed was where babies came from. And people actually, when they looked under the microscope at semen, they thought they saw little homunculi, little people in the heads of those sperms. Of course, there is kind of like little people in the heads of sperms, in that you have a haploid directions for making a human being. And why do I have Superman there using his power vision on the lower right? And that's because it was believed for a long time, beginning with the ancients, that the only reason you could see is that beams were coming out of your eyes and reflecting off of things. That's how you saw. And that cats, for example, were very good at that because, of course, you could see their eyes in the dark. You could see the energy shooting out of the cat's eyes, right? If you've ever had a cat, their eyes kind of shine in the dark because it's not completely dark. It's just reflective. Here's some more recent false beliefs. Scientists certainly had this idea of there being something called phlogiston, upper left there. And of course, for a long time, people thought not that the elements had to do with our periodic table of elements that we're all familiar with, but with the elements of air, fire, earth, and water. Classical mechanics, Newtonian mechanics, we know is now wrong, but we still teach it because it's a good approximation to Einsteinian mechanics. You have the Ark experience, the Noah's Ark thing in Kentucky that Ken Ham runs. You have this, and of course, people still believe in this. These are debunked ideas that people still hang on to, and probably one of the worst ideas that people still hang on to is this idea that humans come in races. And then you'll see the bottom left. I put that in there because you may look at that and say, yes, that's a plant. I've seen that in a forest. That's a lichen. It's a plant. Well, that's what everybody thought up until maybe 150 years or so ago. Lichens are not plants. We can do a moment of science on that sometime, but you can look it up. Lichens are not plants. And yet lots of people probably believe that just because they haven't heard about it. And of course, then this goes to the idea that the importance of beliefs matters. A belief that's considered not very important as to whether a lichen is a plant or something else, that tends to sustain people's belief in it. But the question is, what makes people disbelieve? Everybody's always so concerned about belief, and we've talked about this before. We think people should not believe so much. What can help people give up their beliefs for better ones? That's really a serious problem, and we need to know more about that. But it doesn't look like the mainstream churches, for very understandable reasons, are not much concerned with that question. Well, dramatic disconfirmation, that tends to change people's minds. When somebody's caught with their hand in the cookie jar, or they're caught red-handed, or someone's caught in flagrante delicti. And if you can read the writing at the bottom of that cartoon on the left, the woman is saying, in flagrante delicti, you're always trying to show off your superior vocabulary, not paying attention to the fact that she and her cheating partner have been found guilty right on the spot. And sometimes people are caught with their hands in the cookie jars, and people don't pay attention. They say, oh, well, there's a reason for that. Oh, yes, that's a space alien in bed with her. It just looks like human. She was kidnapped, whatever. It's crazy how people will justify continuing to believe in beliefs that are clearly at least questionable or problematic. And they insist, no, there's no problem. So again, this goes to how can we understand this? And then what does being wrong or making mistakes, what does all this have to do with religion? Why are we even talking about it? You wouldn't find anybody in the mainstream churches talking about this. Well, it turns out it has a lot to do even with what they claim. And this is from Blaise Pascal's famous Pensies, a work of this 17th century mathematician, philosopher, and dyed-in-the-wool, very devout Roman Catholic, but also a Jansenist, and you can look that up, not enough time to get into that today. This is his famous wager, Pascal's wager, and this is the way he put it. Belief is a wise wager. Granted that faith cannot be proved, keep that in mind. He's not saying that faith and believing in God is reasonable. He's saying it can't be proved. He's admitting it. But he says, what harm will come if you gamble on its truth and it proves false? If you gain all. If you lose nothing. Wager then without hesitation that he exists. Now, there's a lot more to it than that. There's a lot more discussion in the Pensies, and I invite you to go check that out at some time. We can't do everything here at church, but hitting the high points and some of the things that are most relevant. But it turns out Pascal's wager is not so original with Pascal. This is from the 5th century BCE. Cadmus, a character in Euripides' play, the Bacchae, who's talking to one of the other characters who's objecting to worshiping Bacchus, the god Bacchus. And Cadmus is saying, well, you should live among us, not outside traditions. Right? We hear that too. Go along to get along. Cadmus says, if you claim this man is not a god, why not call him one? Why not lie? So that we will win honor. Remember the dismal fate of Actaeon. That's another story in the ancient Greece. The ancient Greeks would know all about this. That guy was torn to pieces in a mountain forest. Don't suffer that fate. Join us in giving honor to this god. Well, of course, Pentheus is not persuaded by this, and that's what the play is about. But this is basically Pascal's wager right here, isn't it? This is what you saw if you got your NTCOF email early yesterday morning. Homer Simpson, the wise philosopher, pointing out, suppose you've chosen the wrong God. Every time you go to church, we're just making him madder and madder. Because after all, there's lots of different gods. Maybe you chose the wrong one. I could just make up a God right now and tell you that you're going to hell and will burn forever unless you worship and believe in that God. Why not? I have just as much right to invent a God as the ancient peoples in the Middle East did. How about these Mormons? Joseph Smith made up that stuff back in the 19th century. Here's Mormons knocking on a door trying to put across their gospel, and the woman says, well, what if Odin is the real one? And they are, soon they're worshiping Odin with their little horned hats, which is, of course, mandatory if you're going to worship Odin. So there's almost 5,000 gods being worshipped by humanity, and a lot more than that historically. But don't worry, only yours is right. You'll find out when you die, of course. We're always being told this by believers of a certain stripe. So here they are, the three clerics of the Abrahamic religions. One of them saying, we died, but at least we're finally going to see which of us was right all along. And the ending was a little surprising to all of them. I once myself drew a cartoon where there's two grasshoppers on a leaf of grass, and one is saying to the other, gosh, it turned out the Hindus were right. So John Goche has a video that is off of YouTube, because I think nobody really answered this question of what if you're wrong better than Richard Dawkins. He didn't do so in as much detail as can be done, but this video is definitely worth watching. John, are you ready to put that up? There we go.
This is probably going to be the most simplest one for you to answer, but what if you're wrong?
Well, what if I'm wrong? I mean, anybody could be wrong.
Can you turn it up?
Spaghetti monster with a pink uniform and a flying teapot. You happen to have been brought up, I would presume, in the Christian faith. You know what it's like not to believe in a particular faith because you're not a Muslim, you're not a Hindu. Why aren't you a Hindu? Because you happen to have been brought up in America, not in India. If you've been brought up in India, you'd be a Hindu. If you were brought up in Denmark in the time of the Vikings, you'd be believing in Wotan and Thor. If you were brought up in classical Greece, you'd be believing in Zeus. If you were brought up in Central Africa, you'd be believing in the great Juju up the mountain. There's no particular reason to pick on the Judeo-Christian God in which, by the sheerest accident, you happen to be brought up and ask me the question, what if I'm wrong? What if you're wrong about the great Juju at the bottom of the sea?
So that was at Liberty University years ago.
Did everybody understand that? Did everybody hear it well?
And you can stop screen sharing.
I was able to hear it.
I was able to hear it.
What did he say about the bottom of the sea? I didn't quite hear that.
He said, what if you're wrong and the real God is the great Juju at the bottom of the sea? That's the many gods, which I already referred to, but I think Richard Dawkins puts it exceptionally well. I just couldn't resist putting this up. It's similar to Pascal's wager, but bring especially to, of course, Santa Claus. If you want presents, you need to believe in Santa Claus. After all, it's the spirit of Christmas. We all pretend. At least people are more honest about Santa Claus. And there's also a great meme out there basically saying, kids, you're one day going to learn all about Santa Claus. And when you do, remember, the same people are those who told you about Jesus. Well, there's a lot more to it than just the other gods and the things that we've just already talked about. One thing is, obviously, if there's a lot of other gods, there's a lot of other bets that are possible. And maybe some of these gods don't want you to believe in them. Maybe if you believe in them, you'll go to hell. So you have to be very careful not to believe in them. My daughter made up such a god when she was a little girl. Also, which bets are mutually exclusive. You probably can make more than one bet because there may be gods that really don't care if you believe in another god. And then there are jealous gods that don't want you to believe in any god but them. Also, here's a very important point. Does God take the bet? A subsequent philosopher, of course, as you can imagine, Pascal's wager was critiqued by many people, and one of them observed that it's like someone standing on a riverbed and seeing a leaf going down the river, and it comes up and lodges against a stone, and they're thinking, well, it passed around on the left side or the right side of the stone, and they say out, I bet the Rothschilds $1 million that it's going to go around on the left. And then it does go around on the left. Has the guy $1 million? No, because the Rothschilds did not take the bet. So the question is, does God take the bet? Also, does motivation matter? This is frequently brought up in that maybe deity is not going to be fooled by someone saying, well, I'm just going to believe for the purpose of saving my skin. Maybe that matters. That many people cannot believe. What counsels is that people head and go to church and follow the rituals, and maybe the going along to get along will turn into eventually believing. That was his thought. And does the sort of belief matter? I mean, after all, can you really just willfully believe something? deliberately trying to believe in something is really just believing that you believe without really believing, then you haven't really believed, right? So we can get all into how you actually believe something and what's going on in your brain anyway when you believe something. There must be some kind of little process in your brain where something like Paris is the capital of France gets tagged with a little "that's true" tag, and where Berlin is the capital of Spain gets tagged with a "no, that can't be true, I know it's not true" tag. Also, does only the belief in existence matter? I think most Christians especially would say that it makes a much larger difference as to other things besides whether you just believe. And in fact, this was talked about by some theologians that even devils believe in God, doesn't save them. But of course, that raised another question. Why doesn't it save them? If you're a devil and you know that God exists, what the heck? Why don't you then decide for God? Surely God would forgive you and allow you back into heaven if you got damned to hell with Lucifer and a third of the heavenly host, right? Oh my gosh, all of the difficult, thorny problems that come up with theology. When you start making imaginative flights of fancy, you've got to try to make them all hang together, and it's not easy. But remember, Blaise Pascal was a mathematician. So he was concerned with doing the math, and that's really a part of his wager, is this whole idea that if God exists, then you get infinite reward. And if you hear that there's no God and he does exist, then you have infinite loss. So it's heaven or hell. I mean, the stakes could not be higher. And of course, according to Pascal, you really don't lose anything if you wager that God exists and he doesn't. It doesn't really matter if there is no God. On the other hand, Pascal says if you gain all, but if you lose nothing. And as this little cartoon shows, you don't do anything except for all that you're supposed to do without, and all of the political points of view supposedly that you're going to have to take. You got to wear a chador if you are a Muslim and you decide to choose. So it's not that you lose nothing. You do lose. I say, remember, as a mathematician, we ought to be able to substitute an X for whatever the number is. So let's just say I assert that if you do X, you get infinite reward, and if you don't do X, you're going to get an infinite penalty. Don't you think that you should therefore do X? After all, maybe I'm wrong, but on the other hand, maybe I'm right. If I'm wrong, there's no effect of doing or not doing X. But if I'm right, if doing X gets you an infinite reward, and if not doing X gets you an infinite penalty, why wouldn't you do X? You see how silly that is. Again, doing the math, there is a finite cost versus an infinite reward, supposedly. But in fact, there are infinite possible bets under infinite possible terms. So if you divide infinity by infinity, or infinity by the infinity squared, you are not down to a number that makes sense mathematically. Cost, while finite, must be paid out of finite resources. That is, there are undeniable finite benefits of your finite life that once you gamble them away can never be reclaimed. On the other hand, maybe you're like Blaise Pascal and you just really enjoy obsessing about it. If you do, then I suppose you get enjoyment from it. Go ahead and make a wager, because it's so much fun for you to obsess about your eternal soul, which does not exist as far as anyone knows. So, brief summary, Pascal's wager, and of course we could say much more than this, but it exploits superstitious fear and hope, just like all such supernatural religious propositions. It can justify any course of action. It can justify you're doing X, fill in the blank, whatever X happens to be. Something ridiculous, standing on one foot and jumping up and down and singing "Ollie, Ollie, oxen free" twice a day, whatever it may be. X could be anything. Especially if you are making incomplete and erroneous, relying on incomplete and erroneous information, it is dangerous to make decisions. And although Pascal's wager was kind of a step forward in a way, because it made it more clear how decision analysis works, if you're making that analysis based on information that's not correct or that's not complete, you got a problem. Also, all the unexamined and unacknowledged assumptions. That is a bad way to make decisions. when there's assumptions built in that you're not acknowledging. Kind of like Anselm's, St. Anselm's ontological argument. That says, well, I can prove God by saying that suppose there's a being that nothing greater can exist. Existence is part of the perfection, so therefore this being must exist. So to conclude, what if wrong? Well, one of the things that we get threatened with all the time as unbelievers, as non-theists, is, yeah, you die and go to hell. Well, first of all, they don't know we're going to hell. However, if we do confront God in so-called afterlife, what would we say? Really, you wouldn't need to say anything to God, would you? Why would you need to say anything to God? He knows everything. But here's some things. You gave me insufficient evidence. That was Bertrand Russell's reply to what he would say when he died and was encountering God. You just didn't give me sufficient information, sufficient evidence. I think some other answers, and we can talk about things that occur to you as we're going through this. Your followers did a bad job of speaking for you. I don't think that we refuse to listen or don't listen to the believers, but nothing they say is satisfying. Also, I don't think most of us can believe that God could be as bad as God followers say that he is. Also, we trust that any God worthy of the name would not inflict eternal torture on one. Even Jesus may say that if you, being evil, would not give your child a scorpion or a stone if they ask for a piece of bread, then what human would want to torture anybody forever? Certainly not the best of us would want to do that, even though the best of us are supposedly. I think I would say to God, if you're really as bad as your followers claimed, if your plan is really as absurd as they insist, I don't want any part of it. I'm fine if you just meet with Socrates, Lucretius, Marcus Aurelius, Voltaire, Jefferson, Darwin, Mark Twain, Christopher Hitchens, and their friends. And of course, God, please, when you send me to that horrible place, don't forget to make sure that Jodie Foster, Angelina Jolie, and Asia Argento, and all those cool people are there. As Mark Twain put it, who's going to be there, of course, go to heaven for the climate, hell for the company. Great saying. Mark Twain, wonderful freethinker.
Yeah.
So this is all by way of saying, turn off your microphone, please, Merlin, or anybody else who's going to cough or sneeze. Our church preaches a religion of exploration and discovery of ourselves and everything that we experience, and especially personal, subjective, of what it's like to be a human being and ourselves specifically. What we're doing is not providing an alternative to superstition much as an alternative to religion itself. We're beginning a religion over again. It should be a process of trial and error, not of dogma and you have to believe this forever and never stray. It should be a process of striving to believe the fewest wrong things possible. Why? In the service of human happiness and dignity, and all being ready to admit mistakes and always being ready to exchange one belief for a better one. Quickly, February 28th, things that happened, not a lot of cool things as sometimes happens, but in 1935, Wallace Brothers invented nylon. He was a DuPont scientist. I had long heard that nylon gets its name from some connection between New York and London, that there were two labs that collaborated somehow. And I have not been able to find any corroboration of that. And in fact, I did come across, I think the Wikipedia listing states that that is simply not true. It's an urban legend, not invented. So there's a mistake to dispel if you come across it. It happened in 1953 too, but you're going to have to wait for that for just a moment. In 1993, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms raided the Branch Davidian facility down in Waco, Texas. You remember what happened with that. So February 28th, this is kind of a moment of science and some joke. Two guys walk into a pub. This is a pub in England. It's called Eagle. It's been around since Blaise Pascal, actually, the 17th century. February 28th, 1950, these two dudes went in there and they said to the other people there and said started saying to others, we have discovered the secret of life. because those two people were James Watson and Francis Crick. Indeed, that morning they had worked out the structure of DNA, which crucially hinged on, it's often said, the helical structure over on the right-hand side, which many people already knew about that. Linus Pauling was already working on a model where he thought it was a triple strand, and the nucleotides were on the outside, because they would have to be on the outside in order to present the genetic code. But it was Crick and Watson's insight, thymine and adenine paired together, and cytosine and guanine paired together in the interior. Why did they even think of that? And that's because a few years earlier, a guy named Erwin Chargaff had analyzed DNA and realized that there was a rule. He called it Chargaff's rule, or other people called it Chargaff's rule, that DNA, number of thymine groups always paired and was equal to the number of adenine groups, and the same with cytosine and guanine. So here's a clue that was just crying out to be solved. And I think we today look back and see that it had to be that way, right? Because for every thymine, there's an adenine. For every guanine, there's a cytosine. So Chargaff's rule was the clue to show something important about the molecule of DNA, and also a hint as to how it could be a replicating molecule, because each strand of the DNA has code for the opposite strand. And of course, we know that that's how things work. I would say that I didn't have a concluding that's your moment of science, but that was your moment of science. Here's our principles. Reason. Why? To make sense of things. That is the best way we have to make sense of things. And joy. That's what you do when you pursue happiness. We're looking for enjoyment. A life without enjoyment is not a very pleasant life. Appreciation, that's what we use to discover good. And love, to find meaning and purpose. Lots of different ways we can state these things. Look at that, it just happens to spell the word real. Just a complete coincidence. Let's remember, as we move on to some discussion amongst ourselves, which we will not include on YouTube video, but we always have a lot on, and this is your motivation to go to our website, sign up, and participate. But we don't want politics. Religion and sex are fine, because we talk about those things all the time, but we certainly don't want politics to wreck our civility. In the past 15 principles of civility, here's number 3 and 4. We did 1 and 2 last week. Number 3 is speaking kindly. There's a way to speak to people, a way to choose your words. Sometimes that's not what spontaneously comes out. Sometimes you have to use your free won't. That's as contrasted with free will. Use your free won't to censor yourself and make sure that you're speaking kindly. I think a lot of times we are immersed in the media and all the things that pundits and tend to teach us to use all this inflammatory, nasty way of speaking, and let's not do that. Number 4 is assuming the best, and it's related to the speaking kindly. If believers can take a book like the Bible and assume that it's the Word of God and twist everything, every ridiculous, absurd, and hateful, nasty, offensive thing to somehow mean and good, then I think we can do that with other people. And usually it's not very hard, because most other people do have something good in mind. Of course, if they want to speak clearly that they're for everything Hitler did, then that's up to them. But I don't think we should assume anything. But other than that, people really are well-intended. Remember, too, that we are embodied minds. We've talked about this in the past. Very interesting. We're not just floating around beings with only our thoughts and our rationality, but we have our emotions to deal with, and that our posture, our voice, our tone of voice, the loudness of our voice, and our physical behavior, leaning forward, steepling our fingers, all these kinds of body language things. Those all are clues to our emotional status, but they also influence our emotional status. And we can prove this to ourselves anytime we want. Just big smile. Just make yourself make a big smile and see how that makes you feel happy, doesn't it? It's not just happiness makes you smile. Smiling makes you happy. Maybe we should be smiling more, and do try to smile and have a pleasant expression in order to help make your words pleasant as well. And here's the intellectual aspect of it, that it's impossible to learn anything if you think you already know it. And if a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, who of us knows enough to be out of danger? Which is a paraphrase from a famous poem, which I put this up last time, and I put it up again because I think we should all, it's a short little thing, best to learn by heart. Certainly, I think as good as learning the open lines of the Gettysburg Address. It's Alexander Pope, who said, a little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not the Pierian spring. There shall draughts intoxicate the brain, and drinking largely sobers us again. Interesting. Too bad that's not in the Bible. And then a reminder too that Freethought is not free. Please visit our website at churchoffreethought.org. Click on the PayPal link and donate. It can be just $1, it can be whatever you want. Do support us, because by supporting us, you're supporting yourself. Visit us on Facebook and Twitter. Twitter has been very low volume. We occasionally put things up there, and occasionally I'll reply to crazy things that others put. And of course, our main website, churchoffreethought.org. We depend completely on your continued support. This church would be nothing without all of us pulling together and supporting us financially as well, because it's about doing together what none of us can on our own. Well, it's also about not being too warm and uncomfortably warm in heck if you don't. And you don't want to hang on to that money. We're not asking for 10% after all. Help us promote your values. Live your commitment. Be the future you wish to see. And with that, we can move on to Q&A discussion. And I'll invite our YouTube viewers who are seeing this after the live session to click the bell to get notices, go to our website and sign up so that you get the weekly emails and you can find out how to join us for the live sessions. Thank you so very much, everyone, and good morning.